For early access to more videos like this, plus exclusive content, community discussions, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePoinsett. Welcome to The Mission. What is the mission? Liberation. I'm your host, Bruce Poinsett, and this is the Mission Podcast, which is a tool for never losing sight of the goal and a space for just candid check-ins on lessons learned since the last episode. So this is episode 2. Episode 1 was recorded last night. So what exactly is there to check up on? Well, in episode 1, I mentioned something about being treated like customer service that I think should be expounded upon and publicly. So if you want to find episode 1 to hear more about that, it's on patreon.com/Bruce Poinsett, where we will also be posting more of the audio of these episodes. Anyways, about customer service. So when you're in this sort of anti-racism space in any form, whether it's, volunteering to do anti-racism work, doing it professionally, even just, speaking out about racism in public, if you testify somewhere, share at a meeting, or even just if you happen to be Black in public sometimes, people think that means you're obligated to educate them. I get asked all the time, how do I start a conversation with a Black person about racism? I don't want to say the wrong thing. Well, the answer is you don't. Maybe you read any of the several billion articles with a simple Google search that is available to you. How about following the work of activists, organizations, and scholars who do this work? And here's a real wild thought. Pay them for their services. You know, buy and read their books. Pay for the seminars and invite your friends, your white friends, to join you. Follow and donate to mutual aid organizations. But stop asking random Black people on the coffee line to educate you. Stop harassing your Black coworkers who more than likely probably don't like you like that. Even those of us in this work in one fashion or another, we try and make it clear when we are on and off the clock. If someone explicitly says they want to answer your racism questions 24/7, good for them. But more often than not, we're out here giving you the info, only to have you ignore it and then ask us to repeat ourselves to you personally for free. For example, I listen to this podcast, Yo's is Racist, where the whole premise is literally answering listeners' voicemails, asking racism questions. And, based on the questions I hear, I can say they're out here doing a public service for a lot of clueless white people. And yet, people message and approach them in real life all the time, expecting them to answer racism questions on demand. Like, maybe you don't get this. Their job is the podcast. It's a free resource that's easy to digest through the vessel of comedy. But apparently, that's not accessible and convenient enough for some people. They think they're entitled to your labor. But let me say it again, we're not customer service. I'm not customer service. And these interactions may be annoying, and that's part of why I'm recording this, but there are also other tangible systemic consequences and repercussions. So, first off, it's the normalizing and perpetuating of subconscious white supremacy and just general disrespect, especially for Black people. And to be clear, this isn't just a white person thing. I have there's a person who's very known in the area where I do a lot of work. Again, non non-black person of color who's known for harassing people. Who's known, especially Black people, calling if they she gets your number, call, text you all the time, asking for favors most of the time, which are just very, very, very grifty. And God forbid you don't give her the answer she wants to hear. She'll lash out at you. She will, try and organize people with the classic, the classic white person reverse racism. Or you're the real racist because you're not helping me. And try and, just kneecap people, especially black people. Like it's just a weird pattern, especially with black people, when you don't do what she wants. And this isn't, an isolated case study. Yeah, it happens whether it's me, whether it's other black people in the community, but on a bigger scale, it's a quality of life issue. Think about it. If you can't let go of the subconscious notion that you're entitled to the free labor of black people, even in social justice spaces, even in places where the language of liberation is being preached, then what can black people expect when they go anywhere? Like, let's just, normalize disrespect everywhere you go. And, you know, some ungodly amount of extra hours of stress that is piled onto our lives in a way that often many others don't experience. I mean, literally, it contributes to stress, hypertension, and taking years off our lives. And that's just the health angle, perhaps the most important angle. But then there's also, there is business and organizing ramifications too. Because the other thing I've learned in my traverses in the suburbs with racial justice organizing is there's a lot of people who can pay for these services, but just refuse to. They don't respect they don't respect the work and they don't have to. And but they think you owe them. Give you an example, or give you another example. I had a series of meetings, well, series, I had two, as much as we could do, with a very powerful politician in the progressive space in Clackamas County. And, on one hand, she would tell me how much she respects the work that Respond to Racism has done. But in the same conversation, she's telling me, she needs to see me as a human first before we can discuss policy. So it's like, how do you respect the work if you clearly don't? You missed all the points. But and she thought I should be grateful, that she would invite me to wake up early on a Saturday and educate her over coffee. And, meeting two, this just ended up in a screaming match in a crowded Starbucks. Not the greatest look on my part, but like in addition to just being disrespected in the moment and, daring to daring to offer critiques and feedback to someone who said she wanted it on, local government racial justice work. I was also angrier at the situation as a whole because this is a person who has wealth and power, but is refusing to use that and instead is out here thinking that her contribution should be basically taking free labor from people of color, whether she knows it or not, to advance herself. Because if you're demanding we educate you for free or saying we should be grateful for the opportunity to educate you for free, and your idea of, the great work being done is the city giving you an all expenses paid trip to the Museum of Tolerance in LA, where you apparently didn't learn very much, then the whole thing is backwards. But that's such a problem across these spaces. And it goes to, the lack of sustainability in racial justice work. The reality is like Their funding is needed, infrastructure is needed, and there are people who say they champion this work who actually have the resources to support that infrastructure, but just refuse to because they don't respect the work. They don't value the work. Let's be clear, when you systemically disrespect the work, you are leading and champion and perpetuating the systemic undervaluing of it. And the forces we're fighting against, whether it's status quo politicians, police unions, white supremacist donors, think tanks, super PACs, etc., these forces are staffed and funded. They eat off of oppressing us. They feed their families off of oppressing us. They are set up to stall us out. We can be right, we can be stronger, but if there's no infrastructure behind us, we're going to start starving. And then we're going to start pressing. And we're going to make bad decisions. And then we're going to start fracturing and fall apart. And too often times people end up getting silenced because they just can't afford to keep fighting anymore. You have gifted organizers and educators who can't do the work that all these people who say they value DEI love because, sure, these people have the money to afford it. And sure, they get tangible benefits by being able to say they took these trainings and putting it on their resumes and then putting it in their talking points whenever they get accused of racism. And they get to use that as a shield for advancement, or they get to use that as a way to boost up their political campaigns or their career aspirations. But for all they get from it, they don't respect the work with their dollars. And it's because they don't have to. But let's be clear, this is exploitative. It's not just that it's rude, it's people literally using labor, using the labor of people of color, using the labor of Black people, oftentimes, to elevate themselves while maintaining these white supremacist systems. So, what can you do? Because I know someone will have heard this, watch this, and be like, well, that sounds so bad, but tell me, what can I do? So I'll repeat myself. There's about several billion, who knows how many articles available to you with the simple Google search. There are organizations, there are publications that are, owned by people of color and culturally specific groups that provide this information on a regular basis, on a daily basis, that you could just do some research, do some reading. But you could also follow the work of activists. You can follow the work of proven organizations and scholars. You could pay them, pay them, pay them. They have books. They do presentations, they do seminars, they do conferences, and they give you this information. They put a lot of labor into it. They put years of study. They put blood and sweat and tears on the streets into this. Pay them for their work. There are mutual aid organizations making sure people get by and survive right now during this pandemic, and culturally specific ones, I should say ones led by, different Black and brown communities. Follow them, donate to them, watch their moves, study their moves, volunteer if you can. But this whole exploitative, treating people like they owe you an education, ultimately, whether you know it or not, in service of your needs, it's not going to fly. We're not customer service. We're just not. So that has been today's episode of The Mission. I'll catch you again on the next episode. And until then, the mission continues.